In 2019, a Harvard Business School study tracked two groups of investors making identical financial decisions. One group had to explain their choices to friends and family. The other made decisions in private. After 12 months, the silent group's portfolios outperformed by 23%. The difference wasn't intelligence, risk tolerance, or market timing. It was something far more psychological. And it's costing you money right now.
Picture this scenario. You're considering investing £1,000 into an index fund instead of keeping it in your savings account earning almost nothing. Before you even click buy, your mind starts rehearsing. What will you tell your parents? Your partner? That friend who always has an opinion about money? You begin constructing arguments. You prepare counterpoints. You gather evidence. And here's what's actually happening in your brain. You're creating what psychologists call preemptive social resistance. You're fighting battles that haven't even started. Daniel Kahneman documented this beautifully in Thinking Fast and Slow. He showed how the anticipation of having to justify a decision actually changes the decision itself. We don't just explain choices after we make them. The expectation of explanation warps the choice from the beginning. This is the justification tax. And unlike income tax or capital gains tax, you're paying it voluntarily. Every time you need someone else's approval before making a financial move, you're not just seeking validation. You're transferring decision-making power. You're outsourcing your financial future to people who won't live with the consequences. The psychology here is subtle but devastating. When we anticipate explaining a money decision, we unconsciously optimize for defensibility rather than outcomes. We choose what's easy to explain over what's actually smart. A savings account earning 0.5% interest is easy to justify. Nobody questions it. An index fund that might drop 15% next month before growing 80% over 5 years? That requires explanation. And explanation requires energy, so we choose the path of least social resistance. We keep money in current accounts. We avoid investments we don't fully understand. Not because they're risky, but because we can't explain them at dinner parties. We buy houses we can't afford, because that's easier to justify than renting and investing the difference. The justification tax isn't paid in pounds,
It's paid in opportunity cost. In 2011, Patagonia did something absolutely mental. On Black Friday, the biggest shopping day in America, they took out a full-page advertisement in the New York Times. The headline read, "Don't buy this jacket." They listed everything wrong with buying their products.
The environmental cost, the water used in manufacturing, the carbon footprint. Then they told people to buy used, repair what they owned, and only purchase new items when absolutely necessary. This wasn't greenwashing. They meant it. They launched a repair program and a used clothing platform. Wall Street analysts thought they'd lost their minds. Shareholders demanded explanations. How do you justify telling customers not to buy your product? Patagonia's founder, Yvon Chouinard, gave zero explanations. No earnings calls defending the strategy. No apologetic memos. Just silence and execution. Here's what happened next. Between 2011 and 2018, Patagonia's revenue tripled. They grew from roughly $540 million to over $1 billion annually. The "Don't Buy This Jacket" campaign became one of the most successful marketing moves in retail history. But here's the deeper lesson. Chouinard understood something fundamental about money and psychology. The moment you start explaining your financial decisions to people who haven't earned the right to question them, you've already lost. He didn't justify. He didn't defend. He made a decision aligned with his values and let the results speak. This wasn't recklessness. This was confidence, backed by internal validation. Chouinard knew his customers. He knew his brand. He knew his numbers. What he refused to do was optimize his business decisions for the comfort of people who didn't share his vision. In 2022, Chouinard did it again. He gave the entire company away. $3 billion worth of equity transferred to a trust designed to fight climate change. Not sold. Given away. Imagine trying to explain that decision to a traditional business advisor. Imagine the questions, the pushback, the concern. Chouinard didn't explain. He acted. The Patagonia principle is this. Significant wealth is built by people who stop performing financial decisions for an audience. They make choices based on internal metrics, not external approval. And that psychological shift changes everything. In the 1950s,
Psychologist Solomon Asch conducted an experiment that reveals exactly why we justify our money choices. He showed participants a line and asked them to match it to one of three other lines. The answer was obvious. Laughably obvious. But here's the twist. Asch planted actors in the room who confidently gave wrong answers. And when the real participants' turn came, 75% of them agreed with the obviously incorrect group at least once. They doubted their own eyes because of social pressure. This is conformity bias. And it doesn't just affect line judgments. It affects every financial decision you make when you invite other people's opinions.
When you ask your family if you should start a business, you're not gathering information. You're running an Asch experiment on yourself. Research published in the Journal of Consumer Research in 2017 found that people who discussed major purchases with friends before buying were 34% more likely to experience buyer's remorse, regardless of the purchase outcome. Read that again. It wasn't about whether the purchase was good or bad. The act of seeking approval created regret. Why? Because when you explain a financial decision, you activate different neural pathways than when you simply make it. Your brain shifts from evaluation mode to defense mode. You're no longer asking, "Is this right for me?" You're asking, "Can I win this argument?" Morgan Housel explains this brilliantly in The Psychology of Money. He writes about how personal finance is more personal than it is finance. Your risk tolerance, time horizon, and goals are yours alone. When you justify them to others, you're essentially asking people with different life experiences to validate decisions they'll never have to live with. Consider Warren Buffett's decision to live in the same modest house in Omaha that he bought in 1958 for $31,500. He's worth over $100 billion. Does he explain this choice? Does he justify why he doesn't own a yacht or a private island? No, because the moment you start explaining why you're not spending money like other billionaires, you've accepted their framework as valid. The approval trap is this. Every explanation you give is an invitation for judgment. And judgment from people who don't share your goals is just noise disguised as wisdom. Here's the counterintuitive part. The wealthiest people you've never heard of share one characteristic: financial opacity. They don't post about investments. They don't justify their choices. They operate in silence. There's a book called The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas Stanley and William Danko. They studied thousands of American millionaires and found something shocking. Most millionaires don't look like millionaires. They drive older cars. They live in modest homes. They don't explain their wealth strategy to neighbors. But here's what they discovered that's relevant to our topic. These quiet millionaires made financial decisions quickly and without external validation. They spent an average of 6 hours researching a major investment decision. Not 6 weeks. Not 6 months. 6 hours. Then they acted. Compare that to the average person, who spends months discussing whether to invest, asking friends, posting in forums, seeking consensus. By the time they finally make a decision, the opportunity has often passed. Or worse, they've talked themselves out of it entirely. There's a phenomenon in psychology called decision fatigue. Every time you rehash a financial choice with someone new, you deplete your decision-making energy. You introduce new variables, new doubts, new social considerations that have nothing to do with the actual financial merit of the decision. Now let's look at the flip side. Some people have learned to exploit your need for justification. Financial advisors who charge fees not for performance, but for emotional validation. They exist primarily to let you explain your decisions to someone with a fancy title. Friends who always need to hear your financial plans, not to support you, but to feel superior about their own choices. The people building serious wealth have exited this game entirely. They've created what I call financial autonomy. They have internal metrics for success that aren't visible to others and don't require external approval. They know their number. They know their timeline. They know their risk tolerance. And they've stopped performing their financial journey for an audience that isn't paying their bills. This doesn't mean arrogance or secrecy for its own sake. It means protecting your decision-making process from people who don't have your best interests at heart, even when those people love you. So how do you actually stop justifying your money decisions? Let's get practical. First, create a personal financial constitution. Write down your money values, goals, and non-negotiables. Make it specific. Not, "I want to be rich," but "I want £500,000 invested by age 45 to generate passive income." When you know your target, other people's opinions become irrelevant data points. Second, implement the decision announcement rule.
Stop asking for permission. Stop seeking validation before you act. Make the decision first. Then, if necessary, announce it as fait accompli. Notice how different that feels. I'm thinking about investing in index funds. What do you think? Versus, I've started investing in index funds. One invites debate. The other invites conversation about implementation. Third, practice the phrase, I've thought about it carefully, and I'm comfortable with this decision. That's it. No breakdown of your research. No detailed explanation. No defense. Just a boundary. Research by psychologist Roy Baumeister shows that the more you defend a position, the more cognitive dissonance you create, if that position turns out to be wrong. In other words, over-explaining your financial choices doesn't just drain you in the moment. It makes you more likely to stick with bad decisions later because you've publicly committed to them.
Fourth, audit your financial social circle. Who actually needs to know about your money decisions? Your spouse or partner? Yes. Your business partner? Absolutely. Your parents who still think a pension is the only path to security? Probably not. Your friend who asks about your salary every time you meet? Definitely not. Remember that Harvard study from the beginning? The silent investors outperformed by 23%. But here's what the researchers found when they dug deeper.
The performance gap wasn't about better stock picks. It was about commitment. The silent group stuck with their strategies through volatility. The explaining group second-guessed themselves every time someone questioned their choices. The silent investors experienced the same market drops, the same uncertainty. But they didn't have to defend their positions at dinner parties. They didn't have to explain temporary losses to people who don't understand long-term strategy. So they held. And holding is what built wealth. This brings us back to where we started. When you stop justifying your money decisions, wealth finally grows. Not because silence is magic, but because silence protects your strategy from the corrosive effects of other people's fear, envy, and misunderstanding. Your financial life is not a democracy. It's not a performance. It's not a group project. The less you explain, the more you protect. The more you protect, the more you build. And the more you build, the less you need anyone's approval anyway. If this changed how you think about money decisions, subscribe for more psychology that actually affects your wealth. Next video explores why the people who talk most about money usually have the least of it. The psychology there will surprise you.